This is a AQA Psychology A Level revision video for the paper 1 topic of attachments, with a specific focus on Romanian orphan studies and the effects of institutionalisation. So let's have a look at where this fits in terms of the bigger picture on the specification. So this actual bullet point is shared with Bowlby's theory of maternal deprivation, and therefore it is likely that students do turn to confuse and conflate the two effects. However, Romanian orphan studies have very specific effects, one which overlaps with Bowlby and one which is different. So stay tuned to find out what they are. Thinking in context though, making sure we're prepared for essay questions that aren't with straightforward terms. The term institutionalisation is just for a term that's used for any institutionalised setting, and that depends on the context you're studying. So in aggression, which is a paper 3 topic, the institution is a prison, but in this context for attachment, the institution is an orphanage, which is where children live for long continuous periods of time without their biological parents. So there's often very little emotional care provided because there are a lot of children present in an orphanage. And so it's looking at the effects that institutional care can have on a child's attachment and therefore their development. Okay, they might also refer to it as the Romanian Orphan studies. So children placed in care because their parents can't look after them or because their parents are absent for whatever reason, such as parents dying or abandoning them. So just to begin, I'd like to have a think about the differences of a child being cared for in an institution, so an orphanage, compared to being cared for by a family in a home. Just draw up a list of 2 or 3 differences, and in 5 seconds I'll talk through some of the significant ones. Okay, so we've got some effects of institutionalisation here. The differences being there's no primary attachment figure. Children are likely to be bored and less engaged in social activities. They might struggle developmentally with their intelligence, and they will possibly experience a loss of toys, a loss of interaction with other humans, compared to being raised in a family home. So because Bowlby predicted long-term effects in his theory of maternal deprivation, researchers wanted to extend that to the effects of being an orphan. So yes, there are damaging effects when children lose that maternal figure, that care provided, but what happens if they were sort of never given that to begin with? And sadly, a really tragic opportunity in Romania allowed for researchers to conduct natural or quasi experiments into this, due to the sort of laws and policies in place in Romania in the 90s, which meant that Romanian women had to have 5 children. It was a dictator that imposed that, and so many Romanian parents ended up having to abandon their children and leave them up the doorsteps of orphanages, which had very poor conditions because there was a large influx of this due to the policies that were in place. However, many children were adopted, and some of those children were adopted by British parents. So we move on now to look at the 2 main pieces of research that you'll need to know that establish the effects of institutionalisation, but also allow us to compare what happens when children are adopted and cared for. So you've got the Rutter's English and Romanian Adoptee Study, which is the ERA, and you've got the Bucharest Early Intervention Project. So starting with the ERA, we've got 165 Romanian orphans adopted in Britain, and they were trying to understand what extent good care might make up for the poor early experiences these children experienced. So physical, cognitive and emotional development was assessed at various times in their life for 6, 11 and 15 years of the child's life. And then there was a sort of control group of 52 British adopted children. So when the Romanian children first arrived in the UK, they showed signs of mental retardation. So there's your first effect of institutionalisation. Low IQ, mental retardation. They were also undernourished, so a lack of physical development. At age 11, the mean IQ of those children that were adopted before they turned 6 months was 102. So the mean was a high IQ of 102 compared to 86 if they were adopted a little bit later, so between 6 months and 2 years, and then as low as 77 for children adopted after 2 years. So there are a lot of numbers there to remember, but I'm just going to I'm going to erase that. I'm just going to sort of underline in red some of the main figures that you want to be remembering. Okay. Importantly, there were also these findings were also found in a follow-up study of the children at aged 16. And then we have the second effect, but we will look at this in more detail in the Bucharest Early Intervention project, where children adopted after 6 months had a disinhibited attachment style. So this study assessed attachment in 95 children, and they used the strange situation compared to a control group of 50 children who had never lived in an institution. So strange situation procedure, again, go and watch the Ainsworth video if you're not confident on the strange situation procedure. And what was found was that the children were clingy, attention seeking, and had inappropriate behaviour towards adults. So often no stranger anxiety displayed, which is quite concerning, but usually it's a sort of coping mechanism because these children in orphanages are so used to seeing so many different adults that care for them or provide the basic level of care for them. So 74% of the control group was securely attached. That's a very high number compared to 19% of the Romanian orphans. And then disinhibited attachment applied to 44 of those orphans, but less than 20% for the controls. So evidence that disinhibited attachment is more common in children that are raised in an institution. So what you have here is a summary of the two effects. So as I said, they're not to be confused with the two effects of bulbar maternal deprivation. So mental retardation and disinhibited attachment are your two effects of institutionalisation. This is now an opportunity to pause the video and think of some evaluation points into the research, any strengths or weaknesses, and in 5 seconds I will go through them. Okay, so we have our strength here of practical applications, improving the way children are cared for in institutions. Often this need for a key worker so that the children have a chance to develop secure attachments and avoid disinhibited attachments. So this research is massively valuable and useful. Moving on to the second evaluation point. Many orphan studies conducted before the Romanian orphans often involved many extraneous variables, children that experienced loss or trauma before they became orphans, maybe neglect, abuse or bereavement, so the loss of the parents, and therefore they're traumatised by their experiences, and it becomes very hard to observe the actual effects, whereas in the Romanian orphans there aren't those sort of confounding variables, so they're high in internal validity. I'm going to look at 2 more evaluation points, but remember only 3 are needed for a 16 marker as long as you are able to explain them in detail. So the research into Romanian orphans was longitudinal, so it followed them for a long period of time, which of course the benefits are very useful because otherwise it might have led to mistaken conclusions, such as the effects are long-lasting and inevitable and permanent, whereas actually studying them across their lifespan has allowed things to be identified, such as the physical underdevelopment and the malnourishment effects improved by the time the children were 11. So longitudinal research is highly beneficial. And then lastly, although much of the data is useful, actually we can't necessarily generalise these findings because conditions were really bad in the Romanian orphanages, and you can just do a quick YouTube search or a quick Google image search and you will see that for yourself. and so it's quite rare that children would experience such extreme circumstances, and therefore we can't generalise all of these effects to all orphans. And therefore the fact that these Romanian orphan studies are sort of natural or quasi-experiments means that it then not that useful because there's a lack of control and therefore not able to generalise. That concludes the end of this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful.